Orphan boy was humiliated for buying a dry well, but destiny changed everything. Tears of anger streamed down Dylan's dirty face as businessman Richard Harrison kept pointing at him and laughing in front of everyone present at the auction. The 12-year-old boy held firmly to the small tin where he kept his savings, even after handing the $50 to the City Hall auctioneer. It was at that moment that his entire life of suffering seemed to be summed up in that public humiliation. The man in the beige suit kept shouting that he had thrown his money away, that he was a foolish boy who understood nothing about business. "Did you all see that? A brat just bought a dry hole," laughed Richard, making the whole square laugh. "I hope you learned a valuable lesson, boy." Dylan did not answer. He just stared fixedly at the stone well that was now officially his, ignoring the laughter echoing around him. There was something about that place that had called to him since the first time he passed by, carrying sacks of flour to the bakery where he worked. The auctioneer, Mr. Gerald, seemed embarrassed by the situation. He had known the boy for years and knew Dylan had saved every penny working since he was 8 years old. "It's done then," said Gerald, banging the gavel. "Lot number 15, including the well, officially belongs to Dylan Carter." The crowd began to disperse, but the malicious comments continued. Mrs. Dorothy, the owner of the boarding house where Dylan lived in a small room in the back, approached with her face red with anger. "Dylan Carter, you spent the rent money on this nonsense," she shouted, grabbing the boy's arm. "How dare you do such a thing?" Dylan tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come out. How could he say that for months he had watched birds flying differently over that area? How could he explain that his heart raced every time he passed near the abandoned well? Richard Harrison approached, still smiling maliciously. He was a tall man, about 40 years old, who had arrived in town 3 months ago with promises of development and investment. He had already bought several rural properties and had ambitious plans for the region. "Look here, Mrs. Dorothy," he said, adjusting his suit vest. "It seems your tenant has made a very smart decision. I bet in a week he'll be asking you himself to help sell this marvel back." Dylan finally found his voice, even though he was trembling with nervousness. "I'm not going to sell," he murmured, lifting his chin. Richard's laugh was even louder this time. "What did you say, boy?" "I said I'm not going to sell," Dylan repeated, this time louder, "and my name is Dylan, not boy." The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Dorothy looked incredulously at the boy, who had always been so obedient and quiet. Richard stopped laughing, his eyes narrowing. "Listen well, Dylan," said Richard, pronouncing the name with contempt. "You just learned that in real life, dreams are expensive. I hope that lesson was worth $50. With that, the businessman walked away, followed by his assistants. The square was almost empty now, leaving only Dylan, Mrs. Dorothy, and a few people watching from afar. "Dylan, you owe me an explanation," said Mrs. Dorothy, crossing her arms. "That money was to pay for your room this month. How do you intend to pay me now?" Dylan looked at his bare feet, feeling the weight of responsibility. Since he had arrived in town, orphaned and without family, Mrs. Dorothy had given him shelter in exchange for work at the boarding house and a small monthly rent. "I'll figure it out, Mrs. Dorothy. Please give me a chance." The woman sighed deeply. She was almost 60 and had a heart that tried to be hard, but always softened when she saw children in trouble. "1 week, Dylan. You have 1 week to pay me or find another place to live." After she left, Dylan stood alone in the square. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky orange over the arid landscape of the Texas Panhandle. He walked slowly to his plot of land, running his hand over the time-worn stones that formed the walls of the well. The property wasn't large, maybe about 500 square meters of dry, rocky soil, but there in the center was the circular stone well about 3 meters in diameter and seemingly very deep. Dylan leaned over the edge and tried to see the bottom, but only darkness stared back. "Why did you call me?" he whispered to the well, feeling a bit foolish for talking to himself. The dry wind of the Panhandle was his only answer, carrying the smell of earth and the promise of another rainless night. Dylan sat on the edge of the well and thought about the last 4 years of his life. He had arrived in the town of White Rock after his grandmother passed away, leaving him completely alone in the world. He had no documents to prove his exact age, but he figured he was 8 years old at the time. The town priest, Father Michael, had found a place for him at Mrs. Dorothy's boarding house, and soon after Mr. Benjamin from the bakery offered him work. Since then, Dylan woke up every day at 5 in the morning to help at the bakery. He carried sacks of flour, cleaned the ovens, swept the shop and made deliveries around town. Mr. Benjamin was a fair man who paid little, but he always paid, and he even let Dylan take old bread home. Every coin he received, Dylan religiously saved in the cookie tin he kept hidden under his mattress. He dreamed of one day having enough money to buy a small piece of land, build a house, and maybe even have a family. He never imagined he would spend it all on a dry well that nobody wanted. But there was something about that place that had intrigued him for months. Whenever he passed by making deliveries, he noticed how the birds behaved differently. They flew in circles over the well, as if they were looking for something. And sometimes, in the very early mornings, Dylan swore he heard a different echo coming from inside the well, as if there was water down there. The adults would say it was a child's imagination. Richard Harrison would certainly say that. But Dylan had learned to trust his instincts during the difficult years as an orphan. Those same instincts had warned him about people he shouldn't trust and situations he should avoid. And now those instincts told him there was something special about that well. When darkness completely took over the landscape, Dylan got up and started walking back to the boarding house. Tomorrow would be a hard day. He would have to face the teasing at the bakery, Mrs. Dorothy's demands, and probably more mockery from Richard Harrison. But it would also be the first day as a landowner. Even if it was just a piece of dry land with a useless well, it was his. At the boarding house, Dylan entered through the back door, trying not to make noise. Mrs. Dorothy was in the kitchen, preparing dinner for the few guests that remained. She looked up when she saw him pass. "Dylan, have you eaten?" "Not yet, Mrs. Dorothy." She pointed to a covered plate on the table. "There were some leftovers, but don't think this changes our conversation about the rent." "Thank you," said Dylan, taking the plate. It was a small portion of beans with flour and a piece of hard brown sugar. Mrs. Dorothy could be tough sometimes, but she had never let him go hungry. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. In his tiny room, Dylan ate in silence. The walls were thin, and he could hear the conversations of the other boarders. Most were temporary workers or people passing through town. After finishing his meal, Dylan lay on the thin mattress and stared at the dark ceiling. For a moment he questioned if he had really done the right thing. $50 was a lot of money for him. It represented more than a month of hard work at the bakery. But whenever doubt began to grow, he remembered the feeling he had when he saw the well for the first time. There was something there, he was sure. Sleep was slow to come that night. Dylan lay awake, listening to the sounds of the boarding house quieting down one by one until only the silence of the Texas panhandle remained. It was only when the moon was high that he finally fell asleep, dreaming of crystal-clear water springing from the dry earth. The next morning, Dylan woke before sunrise, as always. He put on his simple clothes and walked to the bakery where Mr. Benjamin was already lighting the oven. "Good morning, Dylan," said the baker, without looking up from the dough he was kneading. "Good morning, Mr. Benjamin." They worked in silence for an hour until the sun appeared on the horizon and the first customers began to arrive. It was then that Mr. Benjamin finally brought up the subject everyone in town was talking about. "I heard you bought old Mr. Joseph's well yesterday." Dylan stopped sweeping and looked at his boss. Mr. Benjamin was a man of about 50, with graying hair and hands calloused from decades of making bread. He had always treated Dylan with kindness, but never pried into his personal life. "Yes, sir, I did. And may I ask why?" Dylan hesitated. How to explain something he didn't fully understand himself? "I think there's water there, Mr. Benjamin." The baker stopped kneading the dough and looked directly at the boy. "Dylan, that well has been dry for over 20 years, Mr. Joseph tried everything to find water there before he gave up. I know it sounds foolish, but—" "It's not foolish," interrupted Mr. Benjamin. "Intuition is a real thing. My grandfather used to find water just by listening to the earth, said he had a gift for it." This answer surprised Dylan. He had expected Mr. Benjamin to also think he was crazy. "Do you think I might be right?" "I don't know, son, but I know you're a smart, hard-working boy. If you saw something others didn't, maybe it's worth looking into." That morning, Dylan worked with more energy than usual. Mr. Benjamin's words gave him a confidence he hadn't felt since the auction. Maybe he wasn't completely crazy. Maybe there really was something special about the well. Around 10 o'clock, when the bakery traffic slowed a bit, Dylan heard laughter from outside. Through the shop window, he saw Richard Harrison talking with some men from town, gesturing toward the bakery. "Look here," said Richard loudly enough to be heard inside the bakery. "The little entrepreneur is working to pay for the loss from his brilliant purchase yesterday." The men laughed, and Dylan felt his face grow hot with shame. Mr. Benjamin walked up to the window and opened the door. "Richard, you're bothering my customers," said the baker calmly. "I'm not bothering anyone, Benjamin, just commenting on the brilliant investment decisions some folks make around here." "Then perhaps it's better to comment somewhere else." Richard smiled, but it was a smile without warmth. "Of course. We wouldn't want to disturb the future mineral water magnate." With that, he walked away with his companions, but not before looking directly at Dylan through the window and shaking his head as if the boy were pitiful. "Don't pay him any mind, Dylan," said Mr. Benjamin when he came back inside. "A man who needs to humiliate a child to feel important isn't worth a thing." But Richard's words kept echoing in Dylan's head for the rest of the morning, and when he left the bakery in the early afternoon, he decided it was time to visit his property again. The sun was strong when Dylan arrived at the land. The arid landscape stretched in all directions, broken only by a few scattered houses and the dirt road that connected White Rock to the neighboring towns. Dylan approached the well and leaned over the edge once more. The sunlight couldn't illuminate the bottom much, but Dylan thought he saw something different. A faint glimmer, as if there was moisture on the stones down there. He picked up a small rock and threw it into the well, counting the seconds until he heard the sound. 1, 2, 3, 4. The sound came fainter than he expected, as if the rock had fallen on something soft, not on hard ground. Intrigued, Dylan looked for a larger rock and repeated the experiment. This time the sound was even more muffled, almost as if... "Impossible," he murmured to himself. But suspicion was forming in his mind. What if there was mud at the bottom of the well? What if there was water, just deeper than anyone imagined? Dylan spent the rest of the afternoon observing the well from different angles, trying to catch any sign that would confirm his suspicions. It was when the sun began to set that he noticed something that made his heart race. A cool breeze was coming from the well, almost imperceptible, but definitely different from the hot, dry air of the Texas Panhandle. It was as if moisture was rising from within the earth. That night, Dylan could barely sleep again. His mind was buzzing with possibilities. If he was right about the water, it would change everything, not just for him, but for the entire community that had suffered from the drought for years. The next morning, before going to the bakery, Dylan decided to look for someone who might have information about the history of the well. He remembered Mr. Raymond, the retired blacksmith who lived near the church and knew practically everything about the town. He found the old blacksmith sitting in front of his house, fixing an old pot. Mr. Raymond was over 70, with completely white hair and hands that still showed the strength of decades working with iron. "Good morning, Mr. Raymond," said Dylan, approaching timidly. "Good morning, Dylan. I heard you've become a landowner." "That's true, sir. Actually, I wanted to ask you something about the well I bought." Mr. Raymond stopped working and looked at the boy with interest. "Ah, Mr. Joseph's well. What do you want to know about it?" "Do you know why it was abandoned?" The blacksmith set the pot aside and motioned for Dylan to sit on the small stone wall. "That's a long story, son. Do you have time?" Dylan nodded, eager to hear what the man had to say. "That well wasn't dug by Mr. Joseph," began Mr. Raymond. "It was made a long time ago, when I was young like you, a government project to bring water to the whole region." "A government project?" "That's right. In the 50s, an engineer came here from the capital with a big team. They were going to make several wells all over the region, create a water distribution system. It was supposed to end the drought for good." Dylan leaned forward, fascinated. "And what happened?" Mr. Raymond sighed deeply. "Politics, son. Always politics. The mayor at the time didn't like that the project didn't go through his hands, said the engineers didn't have authorization to work here, made up a bunch of paperwork to cause trouble. And they stopped the work. They had to stop. The mayor got a court injunction saying the project didn't have an environmental license. Back then, nobody even really knew what that was, but it worked to stop everything. Dylan felt a mix of anger and sadness growing in his chest. You mean they cut off everyone's water because of politics? Exactly. And do you know who the mayor was back then? Dylan shook his head. Colonel Richard Harrison, the grandfather of Richard, who arrived here a few months ago. The world seemed to stop around Dylan. Richard Harrison, the man who had publicly humiliated him, was the grandson of the politician who had prevented his family and everyone in the region from having water. Mr. Raymond, Dylan said slowly, how far did they manage to dig before they stopped? Son, if my memory serves me right, they were almost finished. The head engineer said they were just a few meters away from hitting the water vein. It was a matter of days. Dylan felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. If the blacksmith was right, that meant there was water in the well. A lot of water, just a few meters below the surface where the work was halted. Mr. Raymond, are you sure about this? Yes, I am. I even helped carry some of the tools when they were forced to stop. The engineer was furious. He said it was the first time he'd seen politics so blatantly block progress. Dylan stood up, his mind racing with the implications of this information. Mr. Raymond, thank you very much for telling me this. Dylan, the blacksmith called, as the boy began to walk away. Do you have any idea what you plan to do with this information? Dylan stopped and looked back. I'm going to finish what they started. The smile that appeared on Mr. Raymond's wrinkled face was the first genuine smile Dylan had received since he bought the well. If you need any old tools, you know where to find me. Dylan ran all the way to the bakery, arriving 15 minutes late. Mr. Benjamin was serving the first customers of the day and just looked questioningly at the boy. Sorry I'm late, Mr. Benjamin. I found out something important about the well. Tell me later, said the baker, handing a bag of bread to a customer. Right now, I need you to organize the sweetbread in the display. Dylan worked with renewed energy all morning. Every free moment his mind returned to the conversation with Mr. Raymond. If there really was water just a few meters down, he needed to find a way to continue the excavation. The problem was, he had no money to hire anyone, nor the proper tools for the job. All he owned in the world were the clothes on his back and the land with the unfinished well. But Dylan had learned during his years as an orphan that problems exist to be solved, not to be passively accepted. At lunchtime, when the bakery closed for a few hours, Dylan told Mr. Benjamin everything he had discovered about the history of the well. The baker listened in silence, occasionally shaking his head with indignation. I always knew the Harrison family was no good, said Mr. Benjamin when Dylan finished. My father used to tell stories about Colonel Richard. They said he stole more than your average politician. Mr. Benjamin, do you think I have a chance of continuing the excavation by myself? The baker thought for a moment. Dylan, digging a well is no joke. It's heavy and dangerous work. You're smart and determined, but you're still a child. I know, but... Let me finish, Mr. Benjamin interrupted gently. I said it's dangerous, not that it's impossible. If you really believe there's water there, and if you're willing to work hard, there might be a way. Dylan leaned forward, eager. What way? I know a few men in town who might help on weekends, in exchange for a future right to the water. Folks who don't have their own well and suffer with the drought every year. The idea was brilliant. Instead of trying to pay for help, Dylan could offer to share the resources he discovered. Do you think they'd agree? There's only one way to find out. But first you need basic tools, and you need to prove to them that you're right about the water. Dylan spent the rest of the day thinking about how to get the necessary tools. When he finished work at the bakery, he went straight to Mr. Raymond's house. The blacksmith was welding a piece when Dylan arrived, but stopped his work when he saw the boy. You came back quick, said Mr. Raymond, lifting his welding mask. Mr. Raymond, you said if I needed old tools, you'd help. I did say that. What do you need? Hose, shovels, ropes, buckets. Anything that can help with digging." Mr. Raymond got up and walked to a shed in the back of the house. After a few minutes rummaging through boxes and piles of scrap metal, he returned carrying several rusty but still useful tools. "These have been sitting here for years. You can have them." Dylan couldn't hide his emotion upon receiving the tools. They were old and needed a good cleaning, but they represented the real possibility of putting his plan into action. "Mr. Raymond, how can I thank you?" "Finish that well and invite me for the first bath of fresh water," laughed the blacksmith. "It's been 40 years since I've had a decent bath in the dry season." That night, Dylan organized the tools in his small room at the boarding house. Mrs. Dorothy watched the activity with curiosity, but asked no questions. She had set a deadline of 1 week for the rent payment, and only 4 days remained. Dylan knew he had to act fast. If he couldn't prove there was water in the well by the end of the week, he would lose not only his place to live, but also the chance to realize his dream. The next morning, Dylan woke up an hour earlier than usual. Before going to the bakery, he carried the borrowed tools to the lot and began cleaning them with sand and oil he had borrowed from the boarding house kitchen. The cleaning work took longer than he expected, but when he finished, the tools were in reasonable working condition. Dylan looked at the well and took a deep breath. It was time to begin. He carefully descended the inner stone wall of the well, using a rope that Mr. Raymond had included in the toolkit. The descent was more frightening than he had imagined. The well was deeper than it seemed from the top, and the sunlight faded quickly as he went down. At the bottom, Dylan found exactly what he suspected: mud. Not dry, hard earth, but wet mud that stuck to his hands. This confirmed that moisture was reaching it from somewhere. With the smaller hoe, Dylan began to dig into the mud, trying to deepen the well from the point where the original workers had stopped. The work was exhausting. With every swing of the hoe, he had to climb up with a bucket full of mud and go down again. After 2 hours of work, Dylan had only managed to dig half a meter deeper. His hands were raw and his muscles ached, but he could swear the mud was getting wetter as he dug. When it was time to go to the bakery, Dylan was exhausted but excited. He had found concrete evidence that there was water underground. Now he needed to convince other people to help him. At the bakery, Mr. Benjamin immediately noticed Dylan was different. "You started digging," observed the baker. "How do you know?" Mr. Benjamin pointed to Dylan's bruised hands and the dried mud on his clothes. "So, find anything?" Dylan told him about the wet mud at the bottom of the well and how it got wetter as he dug. Mr. Benjamin listened with growing interest. "Dylan, if you really found water, that's going to change everything around here. Not just for you, but for the whole town." "I know. That's why I need the help you mentioned. Leave it to me. I'll talk to some friends this afternoon. If they agree to help, we can start a work party on Saturday." The rest of the day flew by for Dylan. For the first time since he had bought the well, he felt he wasn't alone in the endeavor. The possibility of having real help gave him an energy he hadn't felt in days. But as he was closing the bakery at the end of the afternoon, Dylan saw a familiar figure approaching down the street. Richard Harrison was coming toward him, and this time he wasn't smiling. "Dylan," said Richard when he got close to the bakery, "I heard you're doing some illegal digging." Dylan felt his heart speed up, but he tried to keep his voice steady. "It's not illegal. The land is mine." "Ah, but digging without a permit from City Hall can be considered an environmental violation. Did you know that?" Dylan didn't know, and Richard noticed his uncertainty. "Look, kid, I don't want to be hard on you. In fact, I came to make a proposal. I'll buy your land for $300. That's 6 times what you paid. A very reasonable profit for 2 days of ownership." The offer was tempting. $300 represented 6 months of rent at the boarding house, and there would still be money left for his basic needs. It would be the solution to all his immediate problems. But Dylan remembered Mr. Raymond's words about Richard's grandfather. If the Harrison family had once prevented the region from having water, why would Richard be interested in a dry and useless well? "Why do you want to buy a useless hole?" asked Dylan, using the very words Richard had said at the auction. Richard hesitated for a split second but recovered quickly. "I'm an investor. I see potential where others don't. Besides, I feel sorry for you. You're just a boy who made a bad decision. I'm trying to help." Thank you for the offer, but I don't want to sell. Richard's expression hardened. Dylan, you're making a mistake. I have friends at City Hall. I can make your life very difficult if I want to. So, you're threatening me? I'm warning you, there are rules that need to be followed. Irregular excavations can result in heavy fines and a work stoppage order. With that, Richard walked away, leaving Dylan alone with his thoughts. The threat was clear. The man would use his influence to stop Dylan from continuing the work on the well. But Dylan had faced worse adversity during his life as an orphan, and now he had something he didn't have before, the certainty that he was on the right path. That night, Dylan talked to Mrs. Dorothy about the situation. To his surprise, the woman listened to everything attentively and made no negative comments about his chances of success. Dylan, she said, when he finished telling her about Richard's threat, I knew that man's grandfather. He was a corrupt politician who only thought of himself. If the grandson is interested in your land, it's because there's something valuable there. You think I should continue? I think you should fight for what you believe in. But I also think you need to be smart. If Richard has friends at City Hall, you need to have friends too. How so? Talk to Father Michael tomorrow. He has influence in town and is a fair man. If he supports your project, it will be harder for Richard to get in your way. Mrs. Dorothy's suggestion was wise. Father Michael was respected by everyone in town and had helped Dylan when he arrived orphaned and helpless. The next morning, before going to work at the bakery, Dylan went to the church to look for the priest. He found him watering the plants in the side garden, an activity the man did every morning before the first Mass. Dylan, greeted the priest with a genuine smile. How are you, my son? Father Michael was about 60, with greying hair and a kind look that always reassured Dylan. He was one of the few adults in town who treated the boy as a person, not as charity. Good morning, Father. I wanted to talk to you about an important matter. Of course. Let's sit over there in the shade. Dylan told the whole story to the priest. The purchase of the well, the discovery about the interrupted government project, the evidence of water underground, and the threats from Richard Harrison. Father Michael listened to everything in silence, only asking a few questions to clarify specific details. Dylan, said the priest when the boy finished, what you're telling me is very serious. If there really is water in that well, and if Richard is trying to stop you from finding it, then we're talking about something that affects the whole community. Do you believe me, Father? I believe in your sincerity, my son, and I believe your suspicions are worth investigating. Water in this Texas panhandle is too scarce for us to ignore any possibility. Father Michael was thoughtful for a few moments. Dylan, you have my support in this project, and more than that, I will speak with some influential people in town to ensure you can work in peace. Thank you, Father. That means a lot to me. But I want you to promise me one thing. Anything. If you do find water, you will share it with those in need. Water is not to be monopolized, it belongs to everyone. I promise, Father. In fact, I was already thinking about that. The smile Father Michael gave Dylan was one of the warmest the boy had ever received in his life. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially to subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. With the priest's support secured, Dylan went to work at the bakery with a lighter heart. Mr. Benjamin was already preparing the dough when he arrived, but stopped his work to hear the news. Richard Harrison came to offer me money to buy the land, Dylan said. How much? $300. Mr. Benjamin whistled softly. That's a lot of money, Dylan. More than you'd see in a lifetime working here. I know. But if he wants to buy a useless hole for that much money, it's because it's not so useless after all. Very clever, smiled the baker. And about the help I promised, I have good news. I spoke with 3 men last night. They all agreed to help on Saturday in exchange for the right to water when you find it. Dylan felt a wave of gratitude. Who are they? Mr. Thomas, who works at the mechanic shop, Charles, who does odd jobs as a bricklayer, and my brother Manuel, who has experience with artesian wells. The prospect of having specialized help immensely excited Dylan. Manuel, Mr. Benjamin's brother, had worked in other towns digging wells and could guide the work more efficiently. When can they start? early Saturday morning. But Dylan, you need to be prepared. If after a full day's work we don't find clear signs of water, it might be best to accept Richard's offer. Dylan understood the help came with conditions. The men couldn't waste entire weekends on a project with no real prospects of success. I understand. I'll do my part until Saturday to have everything ready. And Dylan really did his part. For the next 3 days, he worked at the bakery in the morning and at the well in the afternoon. With each passing day, the mud at the bottom grew wetter and he could dig deeper. On Thursday, something extraordinary happened. Dylan was digging when his hoe hit something hard at the bottom of the well. At first he thought it was a rock, but when he cleared the mud around it, he discovered it was a metal pipe. It was part of the original structure, left by the government engineers 40 years ago. The pipe was partially clogged with mud and debris, but when Dylan managed to clean it, he heard a sound that made his heart race, running water. There was water flowing inside the pipe. Not a lot, but definitely water. Dylan climbed out of the well running and went straight to Mr. Raymond's house to tell him of the discovery. The blacksmith was as excited as the boy. "I knew it!" exclaimed Mr. Raymond, pounding his fist on the table. "Those engineers were competent. They left everything ready to be finished. Mr. Raymond, can you go with me tomorrow to show the pipe to the men who are going to help?" "Of course I can. In fact, I'll be there on Saturday too. I want to see the look on the colonel's grandson's face when he finds out he tried to steal water again." On Friday, Dylan could hardly concentrate on his work at the bakery. His hands trembled with anxiety and anticipation. Tomorrow would be the definitive day. Either he would prove he was right about the water, or he would have to accept his defeat. Mr. Benjamin noticed the boy's nervousness and tried to reassure him. "Dylan, no matter what happens tomorrow, you've already proven you're brave and determined. That's worth more than any water." "Thank you, Mr. Benjamin, but I need to be right. Not just for me, but for the whole town." In the afternoon, instead of working on the well, Dylan decided to visit Father Michael to tell him about the discovery of the pipe. The priest was fascinated by the information. "Dylan, this changes everything. If there's water infrastructure already installed, it means the original project was much more advanced than we imagined. Father, some men are coming to help me tomorrow. Would you like to come along? I wouldn't miss it for the world. I'll be there early to give my blessing to the project." That night, Dylan hardly slept. He lay staring at the dark ceiling of his little room, imagining all the possibilities of the next day. If they really found water, his life would change forever. If they didn't, he would have to accept that he had made the wrong bet. But regardless of the outcome, Dylan knew he had given his best to follow his intuition and fight for what he believed in. Saturday dawned with a clear sky and the sun promising another hot day in the Texas Panhandle. Dylan woke up before 5 in the morning and went straight to the lot, carrying the tools and some provisions Mrs. Dorothy had prepared for the volunteers. The first to arrive was Mr. Raymond, followed shortly after by Father Michael. The two men examined the pipe Dylan had discovered and confirmed it was indeed part of the original infrastructure. "I'm going down for a closer look," said Mr. Raymond, despite his 70 years. The blacksmith carefully descended into the well and spent several minutes examining the pipe and the excavation work done by Dylan. "Boy," he shouted from inside the well, "you weren't just right about the water. You found exactly the spot where the engineers were going to make the main intake." Father Michael crossed himself and murmured a prayer of gratitude. Soon after, Mr. Benjamin arrived with his brother Manuel, followed by Thomas and Charles. Manuel, who had experience with artesian wells, went down immediately to assess the situation. "Folks," said Manuel when he came up, "this boy has done excellent work. The pipe is connected to an underground water vein. We just need to completely unclog the passage and expand the intake." From that moment on, the work became a coordinated operation. Manuel directed the activities, advising where to dig and how to handle the pipes they found. Mr. Raymond, despite his age, proved tireless, hauling up and down buckets of mud. Father Michael took on the role of coordinating logistics on the surface, organizing the tools, and keeping fresh water for everyone. Mr. Benjamin alternated between excavation and preparing the lunch he had brought from home. Around 10 in the morning, when the work was in full swing, Richard Harrison appeared accompanied by 2 men Dylan didn't know. "What's going on here?" asked Richard loudly. Father Michael stepped forward to answer. "Good morning, Richard. We're helping Dylan investigate the well he legally purchased. Without a permit from City Hall, this is irregular. Actually," Manuel intervened, climbing out of the well with his clothes soaked, "we're just cleaning and repairing existing infrastructure. No permit is needed for maintenance." Richard looked at Manuel's wet clothes and his face paled. "Existing infrastructure?" "That's right," said Mr. Raymond, approaching with a piece of pipe in his hand. "The same infrastructure your grandfather ordered buried 40 years ago." The silence that followed was tense. Richard stared fixedly at the pipe in the blacksmith's hands, clearly recognizing its origin. "This proves nothing," he finally said. "No?" smiled Manuel. "Then explain to me where the water that soaked my clothes is coming from." It was at that moment that everyone realized Manuel really was drenched, not just dirty with mud, but wet with clean water. "You found water?" asked Father Michael, emotional. "We found it, and a lot of it," confirmed Manuel. "The vein is open and the water is rising. In a few hours, this well will be working perfectly." The group erupted in shouts of joy. Mr. Benjamin lifted Dylan onto his shoulders, spinning with him. Father Michael knelt and said a prayer of thanks. Mr. Raymond hugged Thomas and Charles as if they were family. Richard Harrison watched everything with an expression of growing horror. His plans to control the region's water resources were crumbling before his eyes. "This isn't over," he said before walking away with his companions. But no one was paying attention to Richard's threats. Everyone was fascinated watching the crystal-clear water that began to appear at the bottom of the well. "Dylan," said Manuel, "in 2 hours this well will be gushing enough water to supply 100 families." The boy couldn't hold back his tears. All the days of hard work, all the nights of doubt, all the public humiliation he had suffered, it was all worth it for this moment. Father Michael approached and put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Dylan, God gave you a special gift. You saw what no one else could see. Father, remember the promise you asked me to make?" "I remember. I want to create a cooperative. Every family that contributes work or resources to expand the system will be entitled to water for free." The idea was met with enthusiasm by all present. During lunch, they discussed the details of how to organize the cooperative and expand the system to serve more families. Mr. Raymond contributed information about the location of other wells that had been abandoned back in the day. Manuel explained how it would be possible to connect several collection points into an efficient distribution system. Father Michael offered to use the church as a meeting point for organizing the cooperative, and Mr. Benjamin proposed that the bakery serve as a communications center to coordinate the work. Around 3 in the afternoon, when water was already steadily flowing from the well, a crowd had gathered on Dylan's land. The news of the discovery had spread quickly through the town, and people were coming from all directions to see the miracle with their own eyes. Dylan watched everything with a mixture of pride and responsibility. His decision to buy a dry well had turned into something much bigger than he had ever imagined. "Dylan," a voice called behind him. He turned and saw Mrs. Dorothy approaching, carrying a small bundle of clothes. "Mrs. Dorothy, you came to see the water?" "Yes, I did, and I came to bring you clean clothes." "You're looking like a mud boy," Dylan smiled. It was the first time Mrs. Dorothy had shown him affection so openly. "Mrs. Dorothy, about the rent." "What rent?" she interrupted. "From today you live at the boarding house as family. No rent." The hug Mrs. Dorothy gave Dylan was tight and full of emotion. "Dylan," she whispered in his ear, "I'm so proud of you." That afternoon, as the water continued to gush from the well and people celebrated around it, Dylan sat on the edge of the property and reflected on everything that had happened. In 1 week, he had gone from a publicly humiliated orphan boy to the leader of a project that would transform the life of the entire community. He had proven that intuition and determination can overcome arrogance and political power. But more important than anything, he had learned that no one needs to face challenges alone. When a cause is just and benefits the community, people will always appear who are willing to help. As the sun began to set, painting the sky orange over the Texas Panhandle, Dylan looked at the well that now gushed crystal-clear water and smiled. He had found much more than water in that hole in the ground. He had found hope, community, and purpose. And that was worth far more than any amount of money Richard Harrison could offer. In the days following the discovery of water, life in the town of White Rock was completely transformed. The news had spread to neighboring towns, and people came from far away to see the well that an orphan boy had made work again. Dylan found himself at the center of attention in a way he had never imagined. Journalists from regional newspapers came to interview him. Authorities from other city halls wanted to learn about the project, and even technicians from the state government appeared to study the collection system. But all this attention also brought problems. Richard Harrison had not given up on his plans and was now using his influence to create bureaucratic difficulties for the cooperative. On a Monday morning, when Dylan arrived to work at the bakery, Mr. Benjamin was waiting for him with worrying news. "Dylan, I had a visit from a City Hall inspector last night. He said the cooperative needs a special license to operate." "What kind of license?" "Something about distributing water for human consumption. Apparently we need lab analyses, an approved technical project, a lot of paperwork." Dylan felt his heart tighten. He had naively thought the hardest part was over when they found the water. "Mr. Benjamin, how much does all this cost?" The inspector couldn't say for sure, but he mentioned thousands of dollars, money the cooperative doesn't have. It was exactly what Richard Harrison wanted, to create bureaucratic obstacles so expensive and complicated that the cooperative couldn't function, leaving the field clear for him to take control of the water resources. "Let's talk to Father Michael," Dylan decided. "He must know how to handle these things." They found the priest in the church reading documents scattered on a table. When he saw Dylan and Mr. Benjamin approaching, Father Michael sighed deeply. "I see you also received a visit from the inspector." "The father too?" "Yes. They came here to say that using the church for cooperative meetings without City Hall authorization is irregular. They want me to apply for a special license for community activities." The three men looked at each other, recognizing the strategy behind the bureaucratic obstacles. "Father," said Dylan, "is there any legal way around this?" "Actually, yes. I spoke last night with a lawyer friend of mine from the capital. He said that when it comes to water resources, the state government takes precedence over city halls." The information brought momentary relief, but also a new concern. "You mean we'll have to deal with state bureaucracy instead of city bureaucracy?" "Not necessarily," smiled Father Michael. "The lawyer said community water projects can be classified as a public utility, which greatly simplifies the process." "And how do we do that?" "We need to document that the project benefits the community as a whole, that it has popular support, and that it follows proper technical standards." Dylan thought for a moment. They had the community's support, that was evident. They had the technical approval from Manuel, who had recognized experience. What was missing was to formalize all of this. "Father, can you organize a community petition?" "I certainly can. And can you get an official technical report on the water quality?" "Mr. Benjamin offered to talk to Manuel about the possibility of bringing a certified technician to do the necessary analyses." They left the church with a defined action plan, but Dylan knew that Richard Harrison wouldn't just stand by watching. The man would certainly try other means to hinder the project, and it didn't take long for that to happen. On Wednesday, when Dylan arrived at the land to check the well, he found 3 unknown men taking measurements around the property. "What are you doing here, Bamand?" he asked, trying to keep his voice firm. "We're doing a topographic survey at the request of City Hall," replied one of them without stopping his work. "What for?" "To check if there are any irregularities in the property boundary." Dylan felt a chill in his stomach. If they could prove there was some error in the purchase documentation, they could invalidate the entire project. He ran to Mr. Raymond's house to tell him what was happening. The blacksmith listened with growing attention and was soon as outraged as the young man. "Dylan, they're trying to steal your land. It's the same tactic Colonel Richard used to use back in the day." "Mr. Raymond, can they do that?" "Only if they actually find an irregularity. But you bought the land officially at the City Hall auction. You must have all the documentation in order." The two returned together to the land, where the surveyors were still working. Mr. Raymond approached the team leader. "Do you have the owner's authorization to work here?" "We don't need it. We're on City Hall business." "And do you have a court order?" The surveyor hesitated for a moment. "It's a routine procedure." "Routine procedure doesn't authorize trespassing on private property," said Mr. Raymond firmly. "I want to see the documentation that authorizes you to be here." After some discussion, the surveyors admitted they didn't have a specific court order, just a generic request from City Hall to check properties in the region. Mr. Raymond expelled them from the land, but Dylan knew they would return with the proper documentation. "Mr. Raymond, I can't fight the entire City Hall. You won't be alone, son. I'll talk to some people today. Richard Harrison may have friends at City Hall, but I have some too." That afternoon, Mr. Raymond visited several people in town, telling them about Richard's attempts to sabotage the cooperative project. The reaction was better than he expected. "Dylan," said the blacksmith when they met again, "I spoke with Councilman Wilson, with Teacher Sarah, and with Mr. Joseph from the Farmers' Union. All of them are going to pressure City Hall to stop hindering the cooperative." "Can they do that?" "They certainly can. The councilman said he'll make a motion in the City Council officially supporting the project. The teacher is going to organize a peaceful support demonstration, and Mr. Joseph will get the support of the other cooperatives in the region." For the first time in days, Dylan felt he wasn't alone against a system that seemed to be working against him. By Friday of that week, the situation had completely transformed. The demonstration organized by Teacher Sarah brought hundreds of people to the central square, all carrying signs supporting the water cooperative. Councilman Wilson read his motion in the City Council, which was unanimously approved, formalizing the municipal legislature's support for the project. And Mr. Joseph managed to get 5 cooperatives from neighboring towns to send letters of support, offering technical assistance and resources for the system's development. Richard Harrison, seeing that his intimidation tactics were creating a backlash, changed his strategy. Instead of trying to sabotage the project, he decided to try to co-opt it. The following Monday, he sought out Dylan at the bakery with a completely different proposal. "Dylan," said Richard, this time without arrogance in his voice, "I want to partner with you." Dylan looked suspiciously at the man who had tried to humiliate him and sabotage his project. "What kind of partnership?" "I have capital to invest in expanding the water system. We can turn this into a real company, with you as a minority partner." The offer was tempting from a financial point of view, but Dylan remembered the promise he had made to Father Michael about sharing the water with those in need. "And the families already in the cooperative?" "They would continue to have access to water, but they'd pay a symbolic maintenance fee. It's a much more sustainable system than a cooperative." Dylan understood that Richard was offering exactly the opposite of what the cooperative stood for. Instead of a community resource, he wanted to turn water into a private business. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Richard, but I'm not interested." The categorical refusal surprised the businessman. "Dylan, you're making a mistake. A cooperative doesn't have the structure to grow. Soon you'll have problems you won't be able to solve. Then we'll solve them together as a community." "That's naive, boy. In the real world, projects need professional management and adequate capital." "Maybe. But this project was born from the community and will continue to belong to the community." Richard left the bakery visibly frustrated, but Dylan knew the man wouldn't give up easily, and he was right. 2 weeks later, technicians from an engineering firm hired by Richard arrived in town to conduct a study on optimizing the region's water distribution system. The study, obviously, would recommend that the system be managed by a private company instead of an amateur cooperative. But Dylan and his allies were already prepared for this move. Father Michael had managed to get the state university to send its own technicians to conduct an independent study on the project. The result was a technical report that not only validated the cooperative's work, but also recommended its expansion as a model for other rural communities. "Dylan," said Father Michael when they received the report, "this document is pure gold. With it, we can get funding from the state government to expand the project." "Government funding?" "Yes, there are special programs for community water resource projects. With this technical report and the documented support of the community, You qualify perfectly. The possibility of official funding completely changed the game. Suddenly, the cooperative no longer needed to fear the financial pressures Richard was trying to create. 3 months after the initial discovery of water, the White Rock Water Cooperative was officially registered and had received a grant of $50,000 from the state government to expand the system. Dylan, now a full 13 years old, had been elected honorary president of the cooperative under the supervision of a board of adults that included Father Michael, Mr. Benjamin, and Mrs. Dorothy. The distribution system had been expanded to serve 40 families, and there were plans to reach 100 families by the end of the year. Richard Harrison, finally accepting his defeat, decided to leave town and look for opportunities elsewhere. But before leaving, he paid an unexpected visit to Dylan. "Dylan," the man said when he found the boy working at the well site, "I came to say goodbye." Dylan stopped working and looked at the man who had been his main adversary in recent months. "Going on a trip, Mr. Richard?" "I am. There's no more room for me here in White Rock." The two fell silent for a moment, watching the crystal-clear water that constantly gushed from the well. "Dylan," Richard said finally, "I want to apologize for how I treated you at the beginning. You taught me a lesson I didn't expect to learn." "What lesson?" "That sometimes a child sees opportunities that adults can't see, and that greed can blind us to what really matters." Dylan was surprised by the sincerity in Richard's voice. "Mr. Richard, you can stay in town if you want. The cooperative is always in need of people with business experience." The offer surprised both Richard and Dylan himself, but the boy had learned that holding a grudge only harms the one who holds it. Richard thought for a long moment. "Thank you for the offer, Dylan, but I think I need to find my own well to dig. Maybe somewhere else I can do things right from the start." With that, Richard walked away for the last time. Dylan watched him leave and wondered if the man had really learned anything, or if he was simply looking for another place to repeat the same mistakes. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out, now continuing. 1 year after the discovery of the water, White Rock had become a national model for sustainable community development. Delegations from other regions regularly visited the town to study the cooperative model. Dylan, now 14, divided his time between his studies, which he had resumed with the cooperative's support, his work at the bakery, and his responsibilities as president of the cooperative. Mrs. Dorothy had officially become his adoptive mother, giving Dylan the family stability he had never had. The boarding house now also served as a training center for other communities wanting to replicate the cooperative model. Mr. Benjamin had expanded the bakery and hired 2 new employees, but Dylan continued working there in the mornings, not out of financial need, but because he enjoyed the work and the company of the baker who had become a father to him. Father Michael had become a regional advocate for water rights, traveling to other dioceses to promote similar projects, and Mr. Raymond, despite being in his 70s, had become the cooperative's official historian, documenting every stage of the project so other communities could learn from the experience. But perhaps the most important change was in the town itself. White Rock, which was once a stagnant town with no prospects, now buzzed with economic activity. New families had moved there, attracted by the availability of water. Small businesses flourished. A technical school had been opened to teach cooperative management and water resource management. And all of this had started with the intuition of an orphaned boy who saw possibilities where others saw only a useless hole in the ground. During the cooperative's monthly meetings, Dylan sometimes watched the dozens of people discussing expansion plans, technical problems, and administrative issues, and marveled at what a simple decision had set in motion. But the moment he valued most happened every Sunday morning, when the cooperative families gathered at the site of the original well for a community breakfast. It was in these moments, watching children playing around the well that had transformed their lives, hearing adults planning the future with hope, observing elders like Mr. Raymond telling stories to the younger ones, that Dylan truly understood what he had achieved. It wasn't just water gushing from that well. It was hope, unity, purpose, and proof that when a community works together for a common goal, there is no obstacle that cannot be overcome. 5 years after that humiliating day at the City Hall auction, Dylan turned 18 and graduated high school with honors. He had received a full scholarship to study hydraulic engineering at the State University. On his graduation day, Father Michael organized a special ceremony on the well's grounds. The entire community was present, including representatives from other cooperatives that had formed following the White Rock model. "Dylan," said Father Michael during his speech, "you taught us that age does not determine wisdom, that financial resources are not the only important capital, and that a united community can turn impossibility into reality." Mrs. Dorothy, now officially his mother, couldn't stop crying with pride. Mr. Benjamin had closed the bakery especially for the event and prepared special bread for the whole community. Mr. Raymond, even at nearly 80 years old, had insisted on giving a speech remembering how it all began and crediting Dylan with the courage to dream big. But it was when it was Dylan's turn to speak that the moment became truly moving. "When I was 12 years old and bought this well," Dylan began, looking at the familiar faces around him, "I thought I was doing it just for myself. I wanted to prove I was right. I wanted to have something that was mine." He paused, emotional. "But I learned that the best achievements are those we share. This well doesn't belong to me. It belongs to all of us. And what we learned here about working together, about trusting each other, about not giving up on our dreams, that goes beyond the water." Dylan looked at the well that continued to gush crystal clear water 5 years after the initial discovery. "I'm going to study engineering not to leave White Rock, but to return with even more knowledge to help our community, and to help other communities find their own water." The applause that followed echoed across the Texas Panhandle landscape, filled with emotion and hope. That night, after everyone had left and the celebration was over, Dylan sat alone on the edge of the well, as he had done so many times over the years. The moon was full, reflecting its light on the water's surface. The soft sound of flowing water created a relaxing melody in the quiet of the Texas night. Dylan thought about everything that had happened since that terrible day at the auction. He thought of Richard Harrison, who had tried to humiliate him and later tried to co-opt his project. He thought of all the people who had supported him when he needed it most. Most importantly, he thought of all the lessons he had learned, that intuition is worth more than formal knowledge when it comes to understanding possibilities, that a united community is stronger than any powerful individual, that water is not just a physical resource, but also a symbol of life, renewal, and hope. When he finally stood up to go home, Dylan made a silent promise to himself and to the well that had changed his life. No matter where life took him, he would always remember that the greatest treasures are not found on the surface but in the depths, and that sometimes you have to dig deep, work hard, and trust your own intuition to find what is truly worthwhile. The water kept flowing through the darkness of the night, as it would for many years, nourishing dreams, sustaining lives, and reminding everyone that with determination, community, and faith, even the driest Texas Panhandle can flourish. During his years at the university, Dylan became an expert in community water systems. His graduation thesis, based on the experience of the White Rock Water Cooperative, was published in several technical journals and became a national reference. But the technical knowledge he acquired only confirmed something he already knew intuitively, that sustainable solutions to water resource problems depend more on community organization than on high technology. Every time he returned home during vacations, Dylan found new developments at the cooperative. The system now served more than 200 families and had expanded to include a community irrigation project that had transformed local agriculture. Mrs. Dorothy had become an expert in cooperative administration, traveling to other regions to help train new groups. Her boarding house now functioned as a training center, recognized by the federal government. Mr. Benjamin had expanded his activities beyond the bakery, creating a farmers' cooperative that processed and sold agricultural products irrigated with water from the community system. Father Michael had been promoted by the church and now coordinated social projects throughout the Southwest region, always using the White Rock experience as an example of sustainable development. And Mr. Raymond, even though he was over 80 years old, remained active as a cooperative advisor and guardian of the project's memory. When Dylan graduated from the university at 22, he received job offers from several major companies. Some offered salaries that represented more money than he had ever seen in his entire life. But on the night before graduation, Dylan called Mrs. Dorothy and told her his decision. "Mum, I'm going back to White Rock." "Dylan, my son, you have wonderful opportunities there in the capital. You don't need to come back for our sake. I'm not coming back for you, it's for me. I learned a lot here at the university, but I also learned that knowledge is only worth something when it's used to make a difference in people's lives." Mrs. Dorothy cried on the phone, but they were tears of pride, not sadness. When Dylan returned to White Rock for good, he brought with him an ambitious project: to create a technical institute specializing in sustainable rural development, focusing on community management of water resources. The institute would be headquartered in White Rock itself, but would serve communities throughout the Southwest region. Students from all over the country could come to study the cooperative model that had been born from the intuition of an orphaned boy. To make the project viable, Dylan secured support from partner universities, international development agencies, and government bodies. But the foundation of the institute would always be the practical experience accumulated by the local cooperative. The inauguration of the Dylan Carter Institute for Sustainable Rural Development took place on the 10th anniversary of the discovery of water in the original well. For the ceremony, authorities came from Washington, university presidents, representatives of international organizations, and journalists from national media outlets. But the most moving speech was given by a person no one expected: Richard Harrison. The former businessman had returned especially for the ceremony. During the years he was away, he had reflected a lot on his experiences in White Rock and had become an advocate for community rights over natural resources. "Dylan," said Richard before the entire audience, 10 years ago I tried to humiliate you for believing in something I couldn't see. Today I come to publicly ask for forgiveness and say that you taught me one of the most important lessons of my life." Richard paused, visibly emotional. "I learned that vision is not a privilege of those with more money or more education. Sometimes it's an orphan child who sees possibilities that experienced adults cannot perceive. And I learned that true wealth is not in controlling resources, but in sharing them." The applause that followed was long and warm. Dylan approached Richard, and the two embraced, symbolically ending a rivalry that had defined the project's early years. "Richard," said Dylan, "there's an opening at the Institute for someone with experience in business management adapted for cooperatives. Are you interested?" The offer surprised everyone, especially Richard. You would offer me a job after everything I did?" "I would offer the job precisely because of everything you did. Your attempts to sabotage the project forced us to become stronger, and now your experience can help other communities prepare for similar challenges." Richard accepted the offer and became one of the Institute's most respected teachers, specializing in how to turn community conflicts into opportunities for growth. In the following years, the Dylan Carter Institute graduated hundreds of technicians specialized in sustainable rural development. Alumni created similar cooperatives in dozens of communities, replicating and adapting the original White Rock model. The methodology developed by the Institute, based on community participation and collective resource management, was adopted by international organizations and implemented in countries in Africa and Central America. Dylan married at 27 to Emily, an environmental engineer who had come to study the cooperative project and ended up falling in love with both the community and the Institute's founder. They had 3 children, who grew up playing around the original well and listening to the stories of Mr. Raymond about the cooperative's early days. Mrs. Dorothy became the children's official grandmother and continued running the boarding house, which was now a mandatory stop for researchers and students interested in rural development. Mr. Benjamin passed the management of the bakery to his son, but continued living in White Rock and working as a consultant for the Institute on food security projects. Father Michael retired at 70, but remained in town as the Institute's chaplain and spiritual counselor for the community he had helped create. Mr. Raymond lived to be 92, witnessing the complete transformation of the region he had known since boyhood. His final years were dedicated to documenting the cooperative's oral history, ensuring the lessons learned would not be lost with time. When Mr. Raymond passed away, the entire community gathered to honor him. During the ceremony, Dylan read a letter the blacksmith had left especially for him. "Dylan, when you were a boy and came to me for the first time asking about the well, I saw in your eyes something I had lost long ago: hope. You gave me back the ability to believe that one person can make a difference in the world. I hope you never lose that ability to see possibilities where others see only obstacles. The water you found is still flowing, but the example you set will flow forever in the lives of the people you've touched." The letter deeply moved Dylan, who realized how his actions had created ripples that spread far beyond what he had ever imagined. At 40, Dylan was invited to speak at the United Nations about community-based sustainable development. During his speech, he told the story of the orphaned boy who bought a dry well and transformed an entire region. "The most important lesson I learned," Dylan told the international audience, "is that sustainability isn't a technical issue, it's a human one. When a community unites around a common purpose, it finds resources it didn't even know existed." Dylan looked at the audience full of diplomats and experts. "We all have our dry wells. Situations that seem impossible, dreams that others consider unrealistic, problems that appear to have no solution. But if we have the courage to dig deeper, if we can gather the right community around us, if we don't give up at the first difficulty, we can find waters that transform not only our own lives, but the lives of everyone around us." The speech was broadcast live to the entire world, inspiring thousands of similar initiatives in rural communities across all continents. But for Dylan, the most significant moment wasn't the standing ovation at the United Nations Assembly. It was when he returned to White Rock and found a new generation of children playing around the original well, listening to the stories of their elders and dreaming of their own impossible projects. Among these children was his youngest daughter, Emma, just 8 years old, who had announced at school that when she grew up, she would find water on the moon so astronauts wouldn't get thirsty. When Dylan heard this, he smiled and remembered how it must have sounded to the adults when he, at 12, insisted on buying a well that everyone knew was dry. "Emma," he said to his daughter that night, "if you really want to find water on the moon, I'll help you dig all the way there." And so the cycle continued, impossible dreams being planted in young hearts, communities forming around common purposes, waters being found where no one imagined they existed. The well of White Rock kept flowing, as it would for many generations, but its true contribution wasn't the water it provided. It was living proof that with determination, community, and faith, any impossibility can become reality. And that sometimes the world's greatest treasures are hidden exactly where no one thinks to look, waiting only for someone brave enough to dig a little deeper. End of story. Now tell me what you thought of this story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave it in the comments with sincere words. Do you believe Dylan made the right decision in buying the well? We'd love to know your opinion. Thank you so much for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories.